Hey, Daryl here, and this is my daily devotional. Just because something seems to be right in your own eyes, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is right, especially if it is in conflict with God's word. Wrong is wrong. Sometimes we rationalize and we compromise, and our 3-pound brain thinks we've figured it out. And so we decide something's right, even though it conflicts with God's word. So Samson was born, and Samson was born to be a Nazirite. He wasn't to have his hair cut. He was not to drink fermented drink. He was to be holy, consecrated, separate to the Lord. But that doesn't mean he didn't have wandering eyes. Let me read here in Judges chapter 14. Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." His father and mother replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among our relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." You see, in his eyes, this Philistine woman was the right one. Although she was of the uncircumcised, although she was of those who were oppressing the Israelites, his people, she was a Philistine. But all of that aside, he knew in his own 3-pound brain that this was the right one for me, and in his eyes. So it goes on and says that Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came toward him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. So he tore the lion apart with his bare hands as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what had happened. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. Again, not considering what was right, being consecrated, being set aside to holiness as a Nazirite, but rather his own eyes made the decision that this was right. Sometime later, it goes on in verse 8, when he went back to marry her, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. In it was a swarm of bees and some honey, which he scooped out with his hands and ate as he went along the way. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Now, what's the deal about this? Well, you have to understand the law that he was separated unto. They're not to touch an animal's carcass. That makes them unclean. And so, again, in his own eyes, he thought, well, there's some honey in the carcass of the lion I ripped apart. Tastes pretty good to me. Here, Mom. Here, Dad. And they were unclean without even knowing they were unclean because he didn't reveal to them the source of the honey. So they went on down to the feast where he was going to marry this Philistine woman. And there were 30 men there. And he said, I'm going to give you a riddle. Here's the riddle. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. And he said, if you guys can solve the riddle, I'll give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. But if you can't solve the riddle, you have to give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Well, the days went by. They were unable to figure out the riddle. And so they went to his new wife and they said, tell us the answer to the riddle. She didn't know. So she went to her husband Samson and cried and cried. In fact, as verse 16 says, Samson's wife threw herself on him sobbing. You hate me. You don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. He said, I hadn't even told my parents the answer. And so she cried the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the seventh day, he finally told her, probably just to shut her up. All right. He finally told her because she continued to press him. She turned and explained the riddle to her people. And before sunset on the seventh day, the men in town said, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? They revealed the answer to the riddle. Why? Because in Samson's eyes, this was all okay and everything he was doing was just fine. Marrying outside of his faith. Killing this lion and taking the honey out of the carcass. And then giving these the riddle that they knew couldn't be figured out. So, just because we think something is right in our own eyes does not necessarily make it true. If it's in conflict with God's word, beware. God bless you. Good day.